They had just checked in. The fresh scent of roses filled their honeymoon suite, the champagne chilled on ice, and the city lights twinkled beyond the hotel balcony. It was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives, a celebration of love, commitment, and the start of forever. But within hours, the suite would become a crime scene, its pristine white sheets stained with blood. What went so horribly wrong? How did a night of romance turn into a tale of betrayal and murder? Before we dive into this chilling case, welcome to the channel. If you love true crime stories that unravel shocking twists, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now let's go back to where it all began. They seemed like a couple straight out of a romance novel. He was charming and ambitious, the kind of man who could command a room with just a smile. She was elegant and captivating, someone who turned heads effortlessly. Together they painted a picture of perfect love, at least to the outside world. They had met in a way that felt like fate. A chance encounter, perhaps at a coffee shop where their hands brushed over the same cup, or at a wedding where they were seated next to each other by pure coincidence. Whatever the setting, their chemistry was undeniable. Conversations flowed easily, laughter came naturally, and soon what started as flirtation grew into something more profound. Their relationship progressed quickly. Romantic getaways, late-night conversations about the future, and whispered, "I love yous," turned into a proposal that could have been ripped from a fairy tale. Friends and family celebrated their union, marveling at how perfectly they complemented each other. But as we all know, what looks perfect on the outside doesn't always reflect the truth within. There were whispers, little things that, in hindsight, might have been red flags. Maybe it was the way she seemed to hesitate before saying yes to the proposal, a moment so fleeting that only those paying close attention would have noticed. Or the way he avoided certain topics, brushing off questions about past relationships or financial matters with a charm that made people forget to press further. Their wedding day was nothing short of a spectacle. A grand ceremony, vows exchanged with teary eyes, and a reception filled with joy and celebration. But beneath the surface there were subtle tensions. A lingering glance exchanged between the bride and a guest who wasn't just another friend. A moment where the groom's smile faltered when he thought no one was watching. Then came the honeymoon, their first days as husband and wife, an intimate escape meant to solidify their bond. They checked into a luxurious hotel, a place known for its breathtaking views and five-star service. The kind of place where love stories were written, not where they unraveled. Yet, within those walls, something sinister was already brewing. Was it premeditated? A secret too heavy to keep hidden? Or was it simply a perfect storm of emotions, betrayal, and impulse? What happened next would leave investigators stunned and two families forever changed. The honeymoon suite was breathtaking. A luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the shimmering city skyline. The hotel itself was one of the finest, a place where celebrities stayed, where newlyweds came to bask in the afterglow of their wedding, and where every guest was treated like royalty. As the elevator doors slid open on the top floor, the couple stepped into their new reality as husband and wife. They had arrived with laughter on their lips, their hands intertwined. The concierge greeted them with a warm smile, offering congratulations and a bottle of chilled champagne. Everything about the scene was picture perfect. To the outside world, they were the ideal newlyweds, still drunk on the magic of their wedding day, stealing glances and secret smiles. The bellhop escorted them to their suite, where rose petals were scattered across the bed, a bottle of wine rested on the nightstand, and soft music played in the background. A perfect beginning to what should have been a perfect honeymoon. But underneath the surface, something was already off. It wasn't obvious, just little things. Maybe it was the way her smile faded too quickly when she thought no one was watching. Or the way he hesitated before pulling her in for a kiss. A fleeting moment of stiffness in what should have been effortless affection. Tiny cracks in an otherwise flawless facade. The first real sign of trouble came just hours after their arrival. It happened in the hotel lobby. The groom had stepped away to check in on a last-minute detail for a planned romantic dinner, leaving the bride alone for a few moments. And that's when it happened. An interaction so brief that, had someone not been watching closely, it might have gone unnoticed. She had been standing near the grand piano, idly tracing the edge of her champagne flute, when a man approached. Not just any man, someone who clearly wasn't just a stranger in passing. There was familiarity in the way he leaned in the way his eyes locked onto hers as if searching for an unspoken answer. The conversation was hushed, their words exchanged in hurried whispers. Her expression shifted, first tense then something else. Something closer to panic. She stepped back slightly, her fingers tightening around the glass. Whatever was being said, it wasn't casual. It wasn't innocent. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man was gone, disappearing into the crowd before the groom returned. Did she tell her husband about the encounter? No. She smoothed out the nervous expression on her face and greeted him with a smile as if nothing had happened. But inside something had changed. As night fell, the couple retreated to their suite. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside their lavish room, an invisible tension had settled between them. Maybe it was nerves, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was something far more dangerous. She excused herself to step out onto the balcony, claiming she needed fresh air. He nodded, distracted, pouring himself another glass of wine. And then, the moment of weakness. A single text message sent. A secret rendezvous planned. She left the suite, slipping quietly down the hall. Whether it was guilt, recklessness, or something else entirely, what happened next would seal their fate. The hotel's security cameras captured what she thought would remain a secret. She wasn't alone in the dimly lit hallway. The same man from the lobby was there, waiting. Their exchange was quick, heated. A touch that lingered too long, a whisper that carried weight. But what she didn't know was that she was being watched. Not by the security cameras. By her husband. Heart-pounding, he followed. Disbelief twisted into rage as he caught sight of them together. He had suspected nothing until now. Until this moment, standing in a darkened hallway watching his new wife betray him in real time. What he did next wasn't premeditated. It wasn't planned. It was pure emotion, raw and unchecked. The confrontation was immediate. Voices rose, accusations flew. The man tried to step in, but it was already too late. The groom's fury had reached a boiling point, and with one impulsive, devastating act, the night spiraled into a nightmare. A struggle. A scream. Then silence. The honeymoon suite that had once been filled with the promise of a beautiful future was now a crime scene. And nothing would ever be the same again. What happened next would leave investigators stunned and two families forever shattered. Stay tuned as we unravel the shocking truth of that fateful night. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this chilling case. A honeymoon suite is supposed to be a place of love and intimacy. A retreat where two people begin the next chapter of their lives together. But for this couple, it was where their marriage shattered before it even had a chance to begin. The night had started out like any other for newlyweds. A private dinner at the hotel's rooftop restaurant, an expensive bottle of wine, soft candlelight flickering between them. But beneath the surface, tension buzzed like an exposed wire. She had barely touched her food, her mind somewhere else. He had noticed, of course. A husband always does. Yet he didn't press. Not then. Later, when they returned to their honeymoon suite, she had excused herself to take a long bath, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He poured himself a drink, gazing out at the city skyline, convincing himself that his paranoia was unfounded. That the woman he had just vowed to spend forever with wasn't hiding something. But then something shifted. A feeling in his gut, an unshakable instinct that told him something was wrong. And when she emerged from the bathroom, her phone clutched a little too tightly in her hand, her expression a little too composed, that feeling solidified into certainty. Minutes later, she told him she was stepping out for a moment, to get some air, to explore the hotel. But he knew better. And so he followed. Down the dimly lit hallway, past the silent doors of other honeymooners lost in their own world. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he turned a corner, careful to stay unseen. And then he saw her. She wasn't alone. The same man from earlier, the one she had whispered with in the lobby. They were tucked into a private alcove near the elevators, their bodies close, their voices hushed but urgent. She placed a hand on the man's chest, not in protest but in familiarity. It was all the confirmation the groom needed. He should have walked away. Should have given himself time to think. But there was no room for logic when his heart was a raging inferno of betrayal and disbelief. His footsteps were heavy as he strode toward them, no longer caring about being discreet. The moment his voice sliced through the air, they both jumped apart. "What the hell is this?" The words came out sharp, laced with fury. She turned, her face draining of color. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, the age-old excuse of the guilty. The other man, now clearly panicked, stepped forward. "Listen, man, But the groom wasn't interested in explanations. "What? You thought I wouldn't find out? On our honeymoon?" His voice cracked, thick with disbelief and rage. The man reached out, maybe in an attempt to calm him, but that only made things worse. In a single movement, the groom shoved him back, sending him stumbling against the wall. The hotel's dim lighting cast harsh shadows on their faces, heightening the tension. The bride was now between them, her hands raised. "Stop. Just listen to me." But it was too late. Some betrayals are like slow poison. They seep in gradually, eating away at a person over time. But others are instant, explosive, the kind that detonate the moment they're discovered, leaving only destruction in their wake. This was the latter. The confrontation escalated rapidly. Voices rose, fists clenched. The groom was seeing red, and nothing, no apology, no explanation, could extinguish the fury burning inside him. The other man tried to walk away, but the groom grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. The bride screamed, pleading for them to stop, but her voice was lost in the chaos. And then, in the heat of the moment, it happened. A single punch, hard, fast, fueled by rage. The impact sent the other man crashing to the ground. His head hit the corner of a marble pillar with a sickening thud. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. The bride dropped to her knees beside the motionless figure, hands shaking as she touched his face. "Wake up," she whispered, but he didn't stir. The groom stumbled back, chest rising and falling rapidly as realization set in. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something far worse. The bride lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes wide with horror. "What have you done?" The groom opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because he didn't know. He didn't know how everything had unraveled so fast, how love had turned into tragedy in the blink of an eye. The honeymoon suite was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. And there was no going back. Luxury hotels are designed to be escapes from reality, places where guests leave their worries at the door and immerse themselves in comfort. But on this night, inside one of the hotel's most extravagant honeymoon suites, the air was thick with something no guest should ever experience: the sharp, metallic scent of blood. A housekeeper was the first to notice something was wrong. It was early morning when she pushed her cleaning cart down the silent hallway, her mind on the long list of suites she had to service before noon. She barely glanced at the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door handle. Many honeymooners slept in late, lost in the haze of celebration and romance. But something made her pause. The door was slightly ajar. Just enough to be unsettling. Her breath caught as she pushed it open, stepping into what she thought would be a routine cleaning job. Instead, she stumbled back in horror. Blood. So much blood. It wasn't just the sight, it was the smell. Coppery, thick, suffocating. The pristine white sheets of the honeymoon bed were now stained deep red, as if someone had tried to wash their sins away but failed. A lamp lay shattered on the floor, its pieces scattered across the carpet like remnants of a struggle. And then there was the body. At first she thought there were two. The bride was crouched beside him, her hands still on his chest, pressing down as if she could will his heart to beat again. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide and unblinking. The housekeeper couldn't even scream. She just ran. Security arrived within minutes. The hotel manager, a man who had spent decades ensuring that guests only experienced the highest level of comfort and discretion, now found himself standing in the middle of a crime scene. The groom was there too, his breath shallow, his hands still shaking. He was muttering something under his breath, as if replaying the night in his head, searching for the moment where everything had gone so wrong. The bride was in a state of hysteria, her body convulsing with sobs. Then the sirens came. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the early morning fog as the police arrived. A team of officers flooded the hallway, their radios buzzing with frantic updates. Paramedics rushed in, but one look at the man on the floor told them all they needed to know. There was no saving him. The investigation began immediately. Crime scene tape stretched across the entrance of the honeymoon suite, a glaring reminder that the fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. Forensics took over, piecing together what had happened in the early hours of the morning. The blood patterns told their own story. There had been a struggle, brief but violent. The impact wound on the victim's head suggested he had hit the marble corner of the room at just the wrong angle, a fatal strike that had taken his life instantly. Security footage from the hallway was the next piece of the puzzle. Investigators watched as the bride slipped out of the suite, her posture tense, her steps quick. Minutes later, the groom followed. The footage captured the confrontation, the moment rage boiled over into violence. The last moments of the victim's life played out in grainy black and white on the screen. The words exchanged weren't clear, but the intent was. A confrontation turned deadly. A husband who had just witnessed the ultimate betrayal. And then there was the final detail that sealed the case. The bruises forming on the groom's knuckles, the undeniable proof of a punch thrown in blind fury. But was it premeditated? Or was it a crime of passion, An uncontrollable moment of rage that ended a life? That was the question investigators needed to answer. And the newlyweds? Their dream honeymoon had ended in the most unimaginable way. One would leave the hotel in handcuffs. The other would never leave at all. By the time the sun fully rose over the city skyline, the honeymoon suite had already transformed from a crime scene into a puzzle for investigators to solve. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the entrance, a stark contrast to the luxury that once defined the space. Inside, forensic specialists moved carefully, photographing every inch of the room, cataloging evidence, and marking areas where blood spatter and fingerprints told their silent stories. The crime scene was chaotic, yet the detectives knew that within the mess, the truth would eventually emerge. The lead investigator, a seasoned detective with years of experience handling domestic homicides, stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the scene with a practiced eye. The body had already been removed, but the crimson stains remained, seeping into the once pristine white bedding, a haunting reminder of the violent moment that ended a life. The detectives' team began their work methodically. First, securing physical evidence. Blood samples to determine how the struggle unfolded. The shattered lamp, likely broken in the chaos. The wine glasses, one of which had fallen to the floor, its contents spilled like a forgotten toast to a doomed marriage. The security footage from the hallway outside, which had already given them their first glimpse into what had transpired. Now it was about filling in the blanks. What exactly happened in the moments leading up to the deadly confrontation? The detective turned his attention to the two remaining players in this grim drama. The bride, still sobbing in the hallway, and the groom sitting in stunned silence, his bloodied knuckles resting on his lap. The hotel's general manager, pale and visibly shaken, had already begun assembling staff members who had interacted with the couple that night. The police needed statements. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seemed, could be the missing piece. The first to be questioned was the housekeeper who had stumbled upon the crime scene. Still trembling from the shock, she recounted how she had entered the suite that morning, expecting to tidy up, only to find a blood-soaked nightmare instead. "I thought, maybe they had just had a crazy night," she admitted, voice shaky. "But then I saw him, lying there. He wasn't moving. And she was just there, kneeling like she was trying to wake him up. I ran. I didn't know what else to do." Her testimony confirmed the timeline. The murder had occurred in the early hours, and no one had discovered the body until much later. Next was a bartender from the hotel's upscale rooftop lounge. He had served the couple drinks earlier in the evening and had noticed something strange. "They weren't acting like a couple on their honeymoon," he said, shaking his head. "She barely touched her drink." He kept looking at her like he was trying to figure something out. It was tense. Not the kind of romantic, love-drunk energy you usually see from newlyweds. Perhaps the most chilling testimony came from the concierge working the overnight shift. He had noticed the bride leave the suite alone at some point and later saw the groom following, his expression dark, his posture tense. "I didn't think much of it at first," he admitted. "Lots of guests wander around at night. But then, maybe 20 minutes later, I heard shouting from the hallway upstairs. I remember thinking, this is going to be a problem. And then, it got quiet." He hesitated before continuing. "And then not long after that, the bride came downstairs, alone. She looked different. I don't know how to describe it. Like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see." Even with the statements, the crime scene evidence, and the security footage, there were still questions. 1. The bride's silence. The bride had spoken only in broken sobs, repeating over and over again, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." But when asked what she meant, she clammed up. What wasn't supposed to happen? The fight? The death? Or something more sinister? 2. The lover's identity. The identity of the victim, the man the bride had been secretly meeting, raised even more questions. Why was he there? How long had the affair been going on? Had this been a spontaneous decision, or was there something premeditated about the meeting that night? 3. The groom's intentions. Did the groom set out to kill, or had this been a moment of unfiltered rage? The bruises on his knuckles suggested he had thrown the first punch. But was it the only one? And what about the fatal wound? Could a single impact against the marble column have killed the man, or had there been more violence that hadn't been caught on camera? 4. A third player? One guest, when questioned, claimed they heard more than just 3 voices in the hallway that night. Could it have been an echo? A misinterpretation? Or had there been someone else present? Someone who had vanished before the police arrived? With so many unanswered questions, investigators knew they had their work cut out for them. Autopsy results would confirm the true cause of death. Blood tests would determine if alcohol or drugs played a role. The security footage was already being re-examined frame by frame, looking for any detail they might have missed. But the biggest question remained. Was this just a crime of passion, or was there something far darker lurking beneath the surface of this so-called honeymoon tragedy? As the case moved forward, shocking truths would be uncovered, truths that no one, not even the police, were prepared for. As the investigation into the bloody honeymoon suite murder deepened, detectives were certain they were closing in on the truth. The evidence seemed to paint a clear picture: a scorned husband, a betrayal uncovered, and a moment of rage that ended in tragedy. But just when they thought they had it all figured out, a shocking twist changed everything. It started with a single overlooked detail. The security footage had been their strongest lead. It showed the bride leaving the suite, the groom following moments later, and the confrontation that ensued in the hallway. What it didn't show, however, was what happened inside the room before the violence erupted. The crime scene suggested a struggle, but forensic analysis revealed something unexpected. The bruises on the victim's body were inconsistent with a single fall. There were signs of multiple impacts, defensive wounds, and, most disturbingly, injuries that couldn't have been inflicted by the groom alone. Someone else had been in that room. And the truth was about to turn the entire case on its head. While investigators initially focused on the groom as the primary suspect, their attention soon shifted to someone else entirely. A hotel guest, one who had initially been dismissed as a witness with no connection to the crime, suddenly became a person of interest. At first, this individual had provided what seemed like an airtight alibi. They claimed they had been in their own room the entire night, with no involvement whatsoever in the events that unfolded. But surveillance footage told a different story. Upon reviewing additional security recordings, detectives noticed something alarming. The supposed witness had actually entered the honeymoon suite just minutes before the murder. They had been inside the room when everything unraveled, yet they had conveniently failed to mention this crucial detail. Why had they lied? And more importantly, what role had they played in the violence? When confronted, their story began to crumble. At first, they tried to maintain their innocence, insisting they had only entered the room briefly and had nothing to do with the fatal altercation. But when faced with forensic evidence, fingerprints, footprints, and traces of their DNA found on the victim's clothing, their resolve began to crack. It was clear now, the murder hadn't just been a crime of passion. It was something far more sinister. After hours of intense interrogation, the truth finally came out. The suspect, someone the bride had known for longer than she had admitted, was more than just an innocent bystander. They had played an active role in the events of that fateful night, and their confession sent chills down the spines of everyone in the room. According to the suspect, the meeting in the honeymoon suite hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. The bride and her secret lover had orchestrated everything, fully intending to break the news to the groom that night. But what started as a confrontation quickly spiraled out of control. The groom hadn't been the only one to lash out in anger. The lover, desperate, scared, and unwilling to let things unravel, had delivered the fatal blow, striking the victim with enough force to end his life. The bride had been paralyzed with shock, and by the time she realized what had happened, it was too late. The confession left investigators stunned. Everything they thought they knew about the case had been turned upside down. The groom, who had been presumed guilty from the very start, was not the real killer. Instead, the person no one had suspected, the one who had positioned themselves as a mere witness, was the true culprit. The case had taken a turn no one saw coming. With the confession in hand, authorities wasted no time in making an arrest. The groom, though still involved in the altercation, was no longer facing the murder charges that once seemed inevitable. Instead, all eyes were now on the real killer, the one who had tried to manipulate the narrative and almost got away with it. As the case moved toward trial, the shocking twists continued. Testimonies revealed layers of deception, and the courtroom was filled with gasps as more damning evidence came to light. What had initially seemed like a clear-cut crime of passion had, in reality, been a web of lies, betrayal, and a fatal miscalculation. By the time the gavel finally fell, the truth had been exposed. The killer, who had spent so much time hiding behind a fabricated alibi, was now facing the full weight of justice. And the honeymoon that had started with love and promises had ended with a tragic, unforgettable lesson. Secrets always have a way of coming to light. The trial was nothing short of sensational. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as reporters and true crime enthusiasts gathered, eager to witness the next chapter of the case that had gripped the public. The honeymoon murder was no longer just a tragic crime, it had become a spectacle. Inside the packed courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, detailing how a romantic getaway had spiraled into a brutal homicide. They presented a carefully reconstructed timeline, piecing together the events of that fateful night using forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies. The first to take the stand was the lead investigator, who walked the jury through the crime scene photos. Chilling images of the blood-stained honeymoon suite flashed across the screen, eliciting gasps from the audience. The detective methodically explained how the physical evidence contradicted the initial version of events given by the accused. Then came the forensic expert, who provided a scientific breakdown of the injuries sustained by the victim. It wasn't just one fatal blow, there had been multiple. This was no accident. This was murder. But perhaps the most emotional testimony came from the victim's family. His mother, tearful yet composed, spoke of the son she had lost, her voice shaking as she described the moment she learned of his death. "He was supposed to start a new life," she said, her words echoing through the silent courtroom. "Instead, he never came home." The defense, however, fought back hard. They painted the accused as someone caught in an uncontrollable situation, a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. Their strategy hinged on proving that the crime had been an act of self-defense or, at the very least, an accident fueled by high emotions. The accused themselves took the stand, their voice trembling as they recounted their version of that night. They insisted they hadn't meant for things to go so far. "It all happened so fast," they claimed, eyes darting toward the jury. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." But when the prosecution played the full security footage, showing the accused entering the suite with clear intent, staying long enough for premeditation, and then attempting to cover their tracks, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The jury took note. By the time closing arguments were made, the outcome of the trial felt all but inevitable. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and legal arguments, the case was handed over to the jury. The deliberations were lengthy, an agonizing process that stretched over multiple days. Reporters speculated on the possible verdict, legal analysts debated on national television, and the families of both the victim and the accused waited in unbearable suspense. Then finally the jury returned to the courtroom. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. The room fell into absolute silence as the verdict was read. "Guilty." The accused slumped in their seat, face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. The defense team looked down, their last hopes shattered. The prosecution nodded, victorious. The judge, after taking a long, deliberate pause, delivered the sentencing. The convicted would spend decades behind bars. The honeymoon that had begun with champagne and promises had ended in a lifetime of regret. With the case officially closed, the public remained divided. Some believed justice had been served, that the punishment was fair and fitting for such a calculated crime. Others argued that the case was more complicated than a simple crime of passion, that the accused had acted out of fear, not malice, and that the harsh sentence failed to take that into account. Regardless of public opinion, one truth remained: no one had truly won. The victim's family had lost a son, a brother, a loved one. The convicted had thrown away their future in a moment of rage and deception. And the story of what was supposed to be a dream honeymoon had become a cautionary tale, one that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. The trial had ended. The sentence had been delivered. The cameras had moved on to the next big story. But for the families caught in the wake of this tragedy, the nightmare was far from over. For the victim's loved ones, no amount of legal justice could fill the void left by his death. His mother, who had once dreamed of seeing her son start a family of his own, now spent her days visiting his grave. His father, once a strong and stoic figure, was now a shadow of himself, drowning in regret over the things left unsaid. Friends spoke of the laughter that had once been a staple in their lives, now replaced with an aching silence. And then there was the family of the convicted. While the world viewed them as the relatives of a murderer, they saw themselves as victims too, of circumstances, of choices made in desperation, of a moment that could never be undone. Parents who had raised their child with love and hope now faced a different future. One of shame, of whispered conversations behind their backs, of empty chairs at holiday gatherings. Siblings who had once looked up to their older brother or sister now struggled to reconcile the person they had known with the one who had made headlines. The ripple effect of this crime stretched far beyond the courtroom. Two families, once strangers, were now permanently linked by pain, each haunted by the same question: why did it have to end this way? As the story continued to dominate discussions in news reports, podcasts, and true crime forums, society at large was left to grapple with deeper questions. This case wasn't just about a love triangle gone wrong or a crime of passion. It was about the hidden fractures in relationships, the destructive power of secrets, and the irreversible consequences of choices made in the heat of emotion. Some saw it as a cautionary tale about betrayal, the devastating price that could come from playing with hearts and trust. Others viewed it as a lesson in unchecked jealousy, how rage, once unleashed, could consume everything in its path. Legal experts pointed to the role of the justice system. Did the trial truly reveal the full story? Could different decisions have prevented the crime altogether? Psychologists weighed in on the psychology of impulsive violence, discussing how people can snap under pressure in ways they never imagined. And in the quiet corners of everyday life, couples reassessed their own relationships, wondering if there were cracks beneath their seemingly stable foundations. Friends paid closer attention to red flags, warning signs they might have once ignored. This case was more than a headline. It was a mirror, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths about love, obsession, and the thin line between passion and destruction. As the dust settled, one question lingered above all others. Was this tragedy inevitable? What if the bride had never strayed? What if the confrontation had never happened? What if just one person had made a different choice that night? It's impossible to know. But what we do know is this: one life was lost, another was ruined. And in the end, there were no winners, only victims of a moment that could never be undone. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all.